Hello, my little explorer. I'm so happy you're here tonight. The fire is nice and warm. Can you hear it? Crackle, crackle, crackle. Poff is already asleep. He's all wrapped up in his little blanket, and I think he's dreaming about tiny stars again. He always dreams about stars. Now, snuggle into your blanket, get nice and cozy, and take one slow breath with me. That's perfect. Tonight, I'd like to tell you a story about a little boy who collected sunsets. In a quiet little village surrounded by rolling green hills, there lived a boy named Eli. It wasn't a famous village. You wouldn't find it on most maps. There were no castles, no giant towers, no busy roads filled with noisy wagons. Only little stone cottages, flower gardens, friendly neighbours, and winding paths that smelled of fresh grass after the rain. Every morning, the baker opened his tiny shop before sunrise. Warm bread filled the air with the sweetest smell. Birds sang from every rooftop. Children waved to one another on their way to school. Old Mr. Rowan swept the leaves from outside his front door. Miss Hazel watered the colourful flowers beneath her windows. Everything happened slowly. No one rushed, no one shouted. It was the kind of place where even the wind seemed polite. But every evening, something magical happened. The whole sky began to change. The blue faded away, making room for colours that seemed too beautiful to have names. Soft gold, warm orange, gentle pink, deep lavender. Sometimes tiny streaks of bright red danced across the clouds. Sometimes the whole sky looked like melted peach ice cream. Other evenings, the clouds became soft purple blankets floating high above the hills. Every sunset was different, every single one. Most people hardly noticed. "Oh, what a pretty sunset," they would say. Then they'd hurry inside to finish dinner, or fold the laundry, or close the windows before bedtime. But not Eli. Never Eli. Every evening, he stopped whatever he was doing. If he was walking, he stopped walking. If he was reading, he closed his book. If he was playing, he gently placed his toys beside him. Then, without saying a single word, he looked up. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 20, sometimes until the very first star appeared. He watched every colour, every cloud, every tiny beam of golden light. Because Eli believed something that no one else believed. No sunset was ever repeated. Not once, not ever. One evening, the clouds looked like giant sailing ships, golden ships, floating across a glowing ocean of light. The next evening, those ships were gone. Instead, the sky was covered with long ribbons of pink and silver. Another evening, the whole world became orange. Even the river looked like flowing honey. The leaves shimmered like tiny pieces of amber. The windows of every little house glowed warmly. And for just a few beautiful moments, it felt as though the entire world had become one enormous lantern. Eli smiled. "I'll keep this one forever," he whispered. Then he gently closed his hand, as though he had caught one tiny piece of the sunset. Very carefully, he slipped it into his pocket. Of course, his pocket looked empty. Anyone else would have laughed. But Eli could almost feel it there, warm, soft, golden, waiting quietly beside all the other sunsets he had collected before. The next evening, he collected another. This one wasn't golden, it was gentle. The colours were pale pink, soft lavender, and quiet blue. It reminded him of sleepy lullabies. Into his pocket it went. The evening after that, dark clouds covered half the sky. For a while, it looked as though there would be no sunset at all. But just before the sun disappeared, one tiny opening appeared between the clouds. A single beam of orange light stretched across the whole valley. It lasted only a few seconds. Then, it was gone. Eli smiled even wider. "The smallest sunsets," he whispered, "can sometimes be the most beautiful." He tucked that one safely into his other pocket. Soon, his imaginary collection became enormous. Happy sunsets, sleepy sunsets, rainy sunsets, windy sunsets, bright sunsets, tiny sunsets, quiet sunsets, hopeful sunsets, each one carrying a different feeling, each one telling a different story. And every evening, before going home, Eli thanked the sky. "Thank you." Just those 2 words, nothing more. One afternoon, an elderly woman carrying a basket full of wildflowers noticed him standing alone on the hill. She watched him for a while. Then she walked over with a kind smile. "What are you doing here every evening, dear?" Eli looked up. "I'm collecting sunsets." The woman blinked. "Collecting sunsets?" Eli nodded. "Yes. I don't want them to disappear." The woman chuckled gently. "Oh, sweetheart," she said kindly. "Sunsets always disappear." Eli smiled. "They disappear from the sky, but not from me." The woman tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Eli gently tapped his chest. "I keep them here." For a long moment, the old woman said nothing. Then she smiled. Perhaps she understood more than Eli realized. She reached into her basket, pulled out a tiny yellow flower, and handed it to him. "For your collection," she whispered. Eli smiled. It wasn't a sunset, but somehow it felt exactly like one. That evening, Eli didn't go home right away. Instead, he climbed a little higher up the hill. It was the highest place he had ever visited. The grass grew long there, swaying gently with every whisper of the wind. Tiny white flowers nodded sleepily beneath the fading light. The world felt quieter, almost as if it was waiting for something. Eli sat down, pulled his knees close, and watched the sun slowly sink behind the distant hills. For a long while, nothing happened. The colours slowly faded. The birds disappeared into the trees. The breeze became cooler. Then, something strange happened. One tiny golden light floated up from the place where the sun had disappeared. Eli blinked. The little light danced gently through the air. It wasn't a firefly. It wasn't a star. It looked like a tiny piece of the sunset itself. Another one appeared, then another, then another. Soon, dozens of glowing lights floated silently into the evening sky. They drifted like feathers, slowly, peacefully, without making a sound. Eli stood up. His eyes grew wide. "They're flying," he breathed. The tiny lights floated higher and higher until they gathered above the hill like a river made of glowing colours. Gold, orange, pink, lavender, soft blue. Every colour he had ever loved. Then, they began moving together, not toward the stars, not toward the moon, but toward the distant forest beyond the valley. Eli hesitated, only for a moment. Then, with a curious smile, he followed them. The path into the forest was unlike any path Eli had ever seen. The trees stood tall and peaceful. Their leaves shimmered softly, catching the last pieces of evening light. The deeper he walked, the quieter everything became. Even his footsteps sounded gentle. The little glowing lights continued floating ahead, never too fast, almost as though they wanted him to follow. After a while, Eli reached a tiny clearing. In the middle stood an enormous oak tree. It was the oldest tree he had ever seen. Its branches stretched toward the stars. Its roots disappeared deep beneath the earth. Its bark shimmered faintly with golden light. The floating colours slowly circled around it, like butterflies returning home. Eli stepped closer, very carefully. Then, the old tree spoke. "Good evening, little collector." Eli jumped. His heart skipped a beat. Then he laughed nervously. "I've never met a talking tree before." The old oak chuckled. "And I've never met a child who collects sunsets." For a moment, they simply smiled at one another. "Why do the sunsets come here?" Eli asked. The great oak looked toward the sky. "Because beautiful things are never truly lost." The little lights continued floating around the branches. "They rest here," the tree explained. "Every sunset carries a memory, a feeling, a hope, a goodbye, a beginning. When people stop to admire them, the colours become brighter. When no one notices them, they fade much sooner." Eli looked down. "So, if nobody watches a sunset, does it become lonely?" The old oak remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he answered, "A little." Eli felt something warm inside his chest. He remembered all the evenings he had spent watching the sky. Maybe those sunsets had never been lonely after all. The old oak slowly lowered one enormous branch. Resting on it was the tiniest little bird Eli had ever seen. Its feathers shimmered with every colour of sunset: gold, coral, rose, purple, even tiny hints of silver. The bird opened one sleepy eye, then the other. It fluttered down beside Eli. "Hello," it chirped. "I've been waiting for you." Eli laughed. "You were waiting for me?" The little bird nodded proudly. "Of course. Every collector visits eventually." "You're just younger than most." Eli blinked. "There are others." "Oh yes," the bird replied. "Painters, poets, grandparents, little children, travellers, gardeners, people who stop and really look." The bird smiled. "They all leave tiny pieces of wonder behind." The little bird suddenly took flight. "Come with me," it chirped excitedly. Together they wandered deeper into the magical forest. Everywhere Eli looked, there were incredible things. Flowers that only opened after sunset. Tiny streams reflecting stars before they even appeared overhead. Soft moss glowing with gentle golden light. Butterflies sleeping beneath crystal leaves. Even the air seemed warmer there, kinder somehow. Every creature moved slowly. Nobody hurried, nobody shouted. Nobody seemed afraid. It felt like the whole forest knew that nighttime was arriving, and it welcomed it with quiet joy. Eventually, they reached a little pond. Its water was perfectly still. So still that it reflected every single star above. Except the stars hadn't appeared yet. Eli frowned. "How can the stars already be in the water?" The little bird smiled. "They're tomorrow's stars." Eli laughed. "Tomorrow's stars?" The bird nodded. "Everything arrives here a little early. The sunsets, the dreams, the stars, even hope." Eli knelt beside the pond. He touched the water with one fingertip. Tiny circles spread across its surface. Every reflected star began gently dancing. The little bird whispered, "Make a wish." Eli closed his eyes. He didn't wish for toys, or riches, or adventures. Instead, he whispered, "I hope people never stop looking at beautiful things." The pond glowed. The little bird smiled. The old oak smiled too. And somewhere high above, one brand new sunset began quietly waiting for tomorrow evening. Eli stayed beside the little pond until the sky became dark. One by one, the real stars appeared above him. The reflections in the water smiled back. For a while, there was no need for words. The forest was speaking in its own quiet way. The leaves whispered. The crickets sang softly. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of pine trees through the air. Everything felt peaceful. Everything felt exactly as it should. The little bird landed gently on Eli's shoulder. "Would you like to see something very few people ever see?" Eli nodded. The bird lifted one tiny wing toward the sky. "Watch carefully." Far beyond the hills, where the last colours of the sunset had disappeared, small glowing threads began rising into the night. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They floated upward like tiny ribbons of light. Gold, peach, rose, amber, lavender, silver. Each one shimmered for only a moment before joining the stars. Eli watched without blinking. "What are they?" The old oak answered. "They are the moments people chose to notice." Eli looked confused. The old tree smiled. When someone pauses, to admire a sunset, to listen to birds, to watch snow fall, or to smile at a flower, that little moment becomes part of the sky. It never disappears. It becomes light. Eli looked back toward the glowing ribbons. "So, those are memories." "They are remembered moments. They are little pieces of gratitude. They are tiny reminders that someone took the time to see how beautiful the world can be." Eli's heart felt wonderfully full. He thought about the old woman with the basket of flowers, the baker opening his little shop before sunrise, the children laughing together, the old apple tree, the river, the butterflies, the warm smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain on his bedroom window. All the little things he had quietly collected, without even realizing it. The little bird hopped into Eli's hands. "You know," it chirped, "most people think collectors gather things." It tilted its tiny head. "But the very best collectors gather moments." Eli smiled. "I think those are the best things to keep." The bird laughed happily. "I knew you'd understand." The old oak slowly lowered one enormous branch. Resting on the branch was a tiny wooden box. It was smooth and beautifully carved. Across the lid, little stars and leaves had been carefully etched into the wood. The old tree gently nudged it toward Eli. "This belongs to every sunset collector." Eli carefully opened it. Inside, there was nothing. He looked up. "It's empty." The old oak nodded. "For now." "What should I put inside?" The great tree smiled. "Nothing." Eli blinked. "Nothing?" "The box isn't for holding sunsets. It's for reminding you that the most beautiful things cannot be held. You don't carry sunsets in your hands. You carry them in your heart." For a long time, Eli simply held the little wooden box. He understood. Some treasures were never meant to be owned, only remembered. Soon, the moon climbed high into the sky. Its soft silver light spread across the forest floor. The little bird yawned. The flowers slowly closed their petals. Even the wind seemed ready for bed. The old oak smiled kindly. "I think it's time to go home." Eli looked around one last time. He wished he could stay forever, but somehow he knew this magical place would always be here. Not waiting, simply existing, quietly, patiently, just beyond the places most people hurried past. The little bird flew beside him all the way back to the wooden gate. When Eli stepped through, he found himself standing on the same grassy hill where everything had begun. The village lights twinkled below. Someone was lighting a lantern. A dog barked softly in the distance. Dinner was probably waiting. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet somehow, everything felt different. From that evening on, Eli still watched every sunset. But now, he noticed even more. Morning dew sparkling on the grass. The smell of warm cookies drifting from a nearby window. a feather floating gently through the breeze, the quiet sound of snow landing on tree branches, the first flower blooming after winter, the last leaf falling before spring. Every tiny, beautiful moment became another sunset inside his heart. Years passed. The little boy became a young man, then an old man. His hair turned silver. Tiny laugh lines appeared beside his eyes. But every evening, without fail, he stopped whatever he was doing. He looked toward the sky and smiled. Sometimes children would sit beside him. "Why do you always watch the sunset?" they asked. Eli would smile gently. He never told them about the magical forest, or the old oak, or the tiny bird. Some stories become even more magical when they're discovered for yourself. Instead, he simply said, "Because every sunset is seeing the world for the very last time, before tomorrow gives us a brand new one." And little by little, the children began watching too. Then their families, then their friends. Soon, the whole village slowed down each evening, just for a few quiet minutes. They looked up. They smiled. Sometimes, they said nothing at all. Because the sky was already telling the story. Lora gently closed the book. The last page made the tiniest little sound. The fire continued to crackle. Warm, steady, peaceful. Poff stretched one sleepy paw beneath his blanket, let out the tiniest yawn, and snuggled in even closer. Outside, the stars sparkled above the trees. Perhaps, somewhere beyond those stars, every beautiful sunset still glows, waiting for someone to remember it. Good night, my little explorer. Thank you for listening to tonight's story. Sleep well, and don't forget to look at tomorrow's sunset. You never know, it might become your favourite one. Sweet dreams.